I'm here to give you basically my scale so you understand when I give a review what I think of the actual game. So let's start with the number one. I don't think I've ever given a game a 1. That, in my opinion, if I were to give a game a 1, has to be an unplayable game. Has to be a piece of shit. Has to be so shitty that I possibly cannot get through the first level. That would be a game that I would give a score to number 1. I have not given a game to that, so we're going to pass over that. Now, if I were to give a game a 2, it would mean the game is frustrating, it has a lot of bugs, it has a non-existent story or just a really shitty one. The graphics are below average, and just about everything in the game is disgusting and not fun to play. That would be a game like Sonic 06. There are other games that have gotten a 2 from me, but Sonic 06 definitely remains possibly one of the worst games I've ever played. So if you're wondering what I would give a 2 or what a 2 is, basically think of Sonic 06. A glitchy, horrible mess with a terrible story, pretty ugly graphics, and overall just a shitty game. Wheelman would be a 3, and the 3 is given to games where they're pretty bad. I would not recommend them. Possibly one of the worst games that year. Usually there's like 1 or 2 out there that I give a 3. It just comes down to a bad story, bad gameplay, just bad everything. The only reason I wouldn't give it a 2 is probably because either or the graphics are a little above average. That's not the case in Wheelman. Or it's playable. And the only reason I can't give it below a 3 because it's playable, meaning it's beatable, meaning that you can actually beat the game. Sonic 06 is very hard to beat. It's such a piece of shit that's so hard to beat. Wheelman, on the other hand, it's beatable. Just a shit game. So I would give a 3 to games where they're beatable or the graphics are, nice looking, but the rest of the game is just non-existent. A 4 would go to a game that has potential to be a good game or at least a decent or even an average anything, but it just fails to live up to every single one of the categories, story, graphics, and everything. Is it playable? Yeah. Can it be fun at times? Maybe, but it really doesn't do anything to try to push the boundaries or at least be good in any section. Lord of the Rings is a perfect example. The graphics, slightly below average. Story, slightly under whatever the hell Lord of the Rings story is about. This one just didn't make sense. Voice acting is Gameplay, well, it's playable and can be fun for a few minutes. It really just never does anything good. It's not good, it's just playable. That's the difference. So Lord of the Rings is a perfect example of a 4 where the game's playable, sure. You can have fun with it if you're a real big fan of it, but I wouldn't recommend even renting it. Again, another game that should not be worth renting. And a 4 would be a game that is beatable, could be somewhat fun for big fans of it, but really is not worth mentioning. Now a 5, and this is probably my favorite one because basically 5 is the middle factor, and 5 is to a game that could be fun at times, has a lot of good ideas, or at least some good ideas, but just doesn't live up to the potential of being a good game. It's a meh game. I love that word. Meh. M-E-H. Basically, Wanted is a perfect example. Wanted could be fun at times. Wanted has okay graphics in the cinema department. Wanted has decent gameplay at times. The story is shit, but that's just an example where it has a few categories that are decent, some really bad, some really cool ideas, but none of it living up to the potential. And that's what a 5 is. It's a meh game. It's a rent at best. There's no way I would ever recommend buying it, even cheap. So Wanted is the perfect example of a game I would give a 5 to, and basically means maybe rent it if you're really bored one day, but it's not really worth mentioning to pick it up. Now a 6 is basically slightly better. I do always mention at the end of a review for a 6 is to rent the game. It could be better to you. Usually I give 6s to games where I can see the potential for some fans out there who will love this type of gameplay. El Shaddai is a perfect example of it. That game to me, I found very boring. To another person might find colorful and fun. The art design is weird and all that. Basically 6 is an okay game. Maybe rent it, maybe even buy it cheap, but it just doesn't do anything majorly impressive. Now a 7 is really where the good starts. 7 is usually anywhere from 7 to right before an 8. For a game for me, 7 or 7.5 basically means it's a good game. Probably definitely worth buying when it's cheaper, about $20. And I almost always say rent the game. For a fan, if you're a fan of shooters, if I give a shooter a 7, usually it's worth renting. If I give a platformer a 7, it's usually worth renting if you like that genre. 7 means that the game is good, has a few flaws that slightly hold it back, something like the story doesn't live up to par with the rest of the game, or it has a few bugs, or the gameplay isn't quite up to par with the rest of the game, the graphics aren't amazing, something like that would warrant a 7 for that game. And I give 7s usually to games that kind of I enjoyed, but I can see it definitely not worth the $60 or even $40. It's a good game, but it's just not worth buying right at the bat. And a perfect example would be the new Spider-Man game. Definitely worth renting for Spider-Man fans like myself, but I wouldn't say buy it at $60. It's a good game. Now an 8 would be a perfect example of a game like, oh yes, Fear 3. It is a great game in many ways. Is it an absolutely amazing game, must buy? For some. I always mention in games I give an 8 that this is a pretty much solid, very solid game with a lot of great things going for it. Usually it either has a really good story or it has really good gameplay. In Fear 3's case, the gameplay definitely is possibly my favorite of the series, and the story is pretty good. The co-op is fun. So overall, it has a lot of great factors in it. Is it worth buying? Sometimes I mention if the length is there, that's worth buying, or the multiplayer is good. Really, the only reason it doesn't get higher is usually because it's great in a few sections, but not great in all. And Fear 3 is a perfect example of where it has great gameplay. You know, the shooting's a lot of fun. It has a good story, but then it's only a 6-hour game. And that really hurts it in the end. You know, the replay value is crushed. And the multiplayer, while it's a neat idea, isn't perfect. So just to go over it one more time, 8 is basically a game that's great. Might be worth the money if you like that genre, but it is still held back where not every category is amazing. Whereas a 9 is when a game basically has almost a perfect idea and great execution. Games like Batman or Dark Souls, these games go beyond what usually developers put. It's the effort into these games and the ideas. Usually it has some innovative ideas in there. Usually the gameplay is up to par or the story is excellent, or in case it's actually funny, Dark Souls and Batman, both the gameplay would be the strongest part in the presentation, whereas the story lacks for both for me. And then we flip to like Catherine, where the gameplay is great in my opinion, but it's not perfect for everybody. But the story itself is very maturely written and well done. So you see, it doesn't mean that every category is absolutely amazing. It just means each category is great, but one really sticks out. Usually it's just that much better for the game. And usually I always mention that 9 is definitely a game that should be bought if you like that game in the genre. And for that genre, it exceeds, and it's one of the best in that genre. 10 is my award that I give out to very few games. 10 does not mean perfect. It does not. No matter what scale you look at, it's up to you to read what the the reviewers state when they are giving a 10. Something like Destructoid says that it's masterly written and fun, blah, 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 but it does not say it's perfect. Same thing with IGN. It says, while not perfect, and you can point out flaws if you want, it exceeds all expectations. And that's exactly what 10 is to me almost. When I give a game a 10, it means two things. One, for that genre, it is one of the best, if not the best, in that genre. Games like Infamous, single-handedly, in my opinion, is the best sandbox game at the moment. Is by far the best superhero game, but it's the best sandbox game up there with Grand Theft Auto, San Andreas, and so on. So games like Uncharted, absolutely phenomenal action platformer. You got games like what else? Mass Effect 2, which is an excellent action RPG. So when I give a 10, it means that it exceeds my expectations. It's excellent. It's amazing in all the categories. And it is a must-own, not only for the genre fans, but for other fans to check out. When I give a game a 10, it usually means that I'm saying, hey, listen up. Fans of other genres who don't look at these genres. Like, say you like RPGs, but you're not a shooting fan. Uncharted 2 would be a perfect example of me saying, hey, look at Uncharted 2 RPG fans. This might change your mind. This is the type of game that exceeds in its genre and absolutely is mind-blowing and worth checking out. So when I give a 10, it does not mean it's perfect. It's sure, I can point out bugs and flaws in every single game.